Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I want to know, you like Charizard, right? I definitely like Charizard. It turns out, basically everybody loves Charizard. Everybody loves the orange dragon so much, in fact, that he's become the favorite of hoarders and scalpers the world over, which made it damn near impossible to get my hands on two of these. I had to drag my girlfriend to 15 card and hobby shops, comic shops, you name it, in order to find just 2 copies of the new Charizard theme deck from Vivid Voltage. It was an eminently frustrating experience, but now that I finally got my hands on it, we are going to crack these bad boys open. We're going to see how they stack up competitively and really, if they can be upgraded in order to make a pretty viable deck in the tradition of the original Charizard theme deck from Team Up, if I remember. So anyways, give me 1 minute to crack these guys open and we'll see what we're working with inside. Okay, so we've got all the usual crap, but, we've got our nice cracked ice hollow of the Charizard. There's a code card there to scan it in. We have a nice fancy little coin, which I've been seeing everywhere on PTCGO, especially when I was trying to make that Cramorant thing work. And then, of course, playmat, damage counters, all that kind of stuff. But, of course, we also have the main deck here, so let's see what we've got to work with in here. So, like any theme deck, there's going to be a ton of energy, and alright, we're going to start getting our main evolutionary line and some of the other good things here. Now, just from a glance at the back of the box, I was actually surprised to see how little there is to work with in one of these decks. In terms of outright viable cards, basically you have the Charizard line and a very small handful of items and, supporters. Leon, for example, the supporter that makes this Charizard go boom is at 2 copies in this theme deck. They couldn't even give you 3, which is surprising because that gives a bit of a damage cap to this Charizard's attack. This Charizard really, you want as many Leons in the discard pile as possible, but with only, I think, 2 in here, the max you're doing is 200 damage. And I understand to a certain extent, like they don't want to make this theme deck like ridiculously overpowered, where once you get this one set up with 4 Leon in the discard, you're hitting for 300, but still feels a little stingy. You only get 2 Charizard as well, which is like, ooh, okay. But again, you have some recovery, there's a bit of search, some consistency stuff. It's nice to get, a couple Professor's research. But, the rest of the Pokemon lineup is basically worthless, so what we're going to have to do is take the main Charizard line here, see what we can make of these guys, and then find a few spicy techs and the like to round out the lineup. So I'm going to hop on over to PTCGO and I'm going to see what I can do to take these cards over here and whip the deck into fine fighting form. So let's hop on over there and see what we can do. Okay, so this theme deck upgrade was actually fairly straightforward. Unlike the Dreadnought deck, the intended core of this deck is really good, and as far as boss monsters go, this Charizard is fantastic. So what we're doing is honing in on the Charizard Leon core found in the deck and building the deck around it to turbo it out. To do this, we've bumped up our counts of the Charizard line and Leon to full playsets. The only place I've made a cut in the Charizard lineup is Charmeleon, because you don't actually want to waste time trying to manually evolve it. Basically, Rare Candy is your friend here. I've also added Welder as a key supporter here. We're a little strapped for draw power in terms of supporters, and since Charizard's attack costs 2 fire energies, Welder is perfect here. The boss's orders is also there to help us target vulnerable Pokemon, especially multi-prizers like Dedenne and Crobat that can be easily nuked by Charizard. In terms of other Pokemon, I've added a single Talonflame V. I'm trying to keep the build budget, so 1 is a good place to start. Otherwise, I would probably go 2 or 3. Its first attack can let you dump and refill your hand on turn 1. That's even if like you are going first when you normally can't attack, which is fantastic. And hopefully you can use that to place a Leon or 2 in the discard pile to start powering up Charizard's attack. It's also a decent backup attacker in its own right, hitting 160 for 3 fire energies at the cost of discarding 1, and it has a free retreat, which is always great. It's fantastic to have a Pokemon that you can always send up and then pivot out of, depending on the situation. Dedenne and Oricorio are here to help with draw power, with the former allowing you to discard Leons pretty handily, and Oricorio being there to help you pull 3 extra cards out of your deck every time a Charizard goes down, which, you know, while Charizard is beefy enough, I guess, for a Stage 2 1 prizer, you're still getting KO'd by pretty much everything relevant in the meta, so yeah, getting those 3 extra cards to hopefully evolve up the next Charizard is always great. Then I rounded out the lineup with 1 Mewtwo and Oranguru. This particular Mewtwo is good because it allows you to put a supporter on top of your deck for the next turn. So maybe we put a Welder on top, or we put a Leon on top to discard with Battle Sense, Charizard's ability. Or if we want to grab the Welder, then we grab it with Oranguru's Primate Wisdom. Speaking of Oranguru, it is very handy. Like I said, you can use it to place Leon on top of your deck if you want to discard it. Or, more likely, if you need to discard your hand but you don't want to throw away vital rare candies, you can put them on top of your deck to ensure that you just draw back into them. And as for the rest, it's mostly just consistency boosting. As much as possible, we want to assemble the pieces to quickly evolve Charizards, and then get 2 to 3 Leons in the discard pile so you can start taking easy KOs on most GXs and Pokemon V. And that's the deck. So why don't we hop on over to PTCGO and see if we can win some games. So here's an interesting example of how much everyone loves Charizard. Just in the testing phase of the deck, I played nothing but Charizard decks online. Charizard is so popular that you'd think ADP went extinct, except it's totally about to flood PTCGO, courtesy of that new League Battle deck. Anyway, once I sat down to play some serious games, I of course ran into more Charizards right away. Now, this is actually interesting because we get to see how the mirror matchup plays out, and really it's a delicate game of trying to take the first KO while ensuring that that first KO you take is an opposing Charizard. See, you each have 4 Charizard, ideally, and the first person to lose one is immediately behind as you trade KOs back and forth. You're down to 3, your opponent still has 4, you have to go through 4 Charizards with only 3 Charizards remaining in your deck, that kind of thing. Now, recovery like Ordinary Rod helps, but still there's a higher chance that you'll run out of resources or whiff the rare candy you need to keep pace with your opponent if your opponent takes out Charizard first. This is one of the reasons that I wanted to have Talonflame on hand because, you know, in a pinch it'll work, although you should note that it will not KO opposing Charizard in one hit. So, you know, be wary of that. Now, managing your rare candies is also a very pressing matter. Most of these decks play a single Charmeleon just in case, so if you have to discard rare candies, which you can't really recover, then you're likely going to fall behind and not catch up. Now, that Charmeleon is there to give you a bit of safety, so you can evolve up a Charizard on your bench, but it's still not a position you want to be in, you know, having to rely on Charmeleon on the bench and sending up Talonflame basically as a 2-prize turkey for your opponent when you're in a tight spot. This game was full of series back and forth, and by ditching those rare candies early on, I really made my prospects terrible. But as it happens, my opponent burned through the resources faster than I could, so when they could have very easily bossed up my Dedenne or Oricorio, they didn't have bosses on hand because they discarded them, so they locked themselves essentially into having to go through my Charizards, which would allow me to buy myself some time. Now, my opponent probably didn't realize that I had maybe one more rare candy in deck, but probably in my prizes, so if they pressed the issue towards the end of the game, they probably would have come out on top, but they may have also seen that with me stacking boss on top of my deck courtesy of Mewtwo, there was a good chance that I could have closed things out with a well-timed KO if I managed to get that, last rare candy and take out something like their Oricorio or Dedenne. Now, I have to say it was an extremely close match, and I really have to give it to my opponent for putting me through the ringer here. I also have to think about including that new Snorlax because it's a really nice tech. My opponent started out with it and used it to draw a ton of cards, and you can always scoop it up just like the Mewtwo or Oranguru, so hey, something to think about. Touché, Mongol Monde. Touché. This next game is a fun one. Charizard wasn't the only interesting deck to come out of Vivid Voltage. Let's go Cramorant. We also got Alakazam V. Now, this Psychic deck plays around a very interesting mechanic in that it depends on the opponent having a large hand size in order to dish out massive damage. For me, this is exactly the kind of matchup I live for. Charizard as a one-prize deck can take very favorable trades against multi-prize decks, and this Alakazam deck is a particularly good matchup because Alakazam V only has 190 HP, meaning that I only have to put 2 Leons in the discard pile in order to take the KO with Charizard. Now, the early game is definitely where this Alakazam can put on serious pressure. My little Charmanders and Charmeleons, yes, are easily KO'd by this Alakazam, even if I only have 2 or 3 cards in hand. But luckily, we can take those early losses because each one only gives up a single prize. Now, Alakazam's squishiness actually comes up pretty early on because while I actually can't take it out with the first Charizard I'm able to set up, I am able to follow it up with a KO courtesy of Charmeleon, putting the game on even ground again, at least as far as the prize race is concerned. Now, my opponent can come in and take a revenge KO, sure, but in trying to set up massive damage, my opponent actually helped me out by filling my hand with very useful cards. That's probably the major flaw of Alakazam as an archetype, in that you are literally giving your opponent resources to use against you. Sure, you can take some big KOs, and sometimes it's worth it if you blow up a couple of VMAXs or tag teams, but otherwise you're essentially setting up your opponent's own comeback. So you really have to win quickly with this Alakazam deck, otherwise you're just giving the opponents the tools they need to come back and take you out of the game. And that's pretty much what happened here. I was able to build up another Charizard, and because my opponent had helped me, thin my deck, I had enough Leons in the discard pile to KO almost anything. I did get surprised at the end of the game by a Gengar and Mimikyu GX, which is a card, I'll be honest, which usually causes me to rage quit, because its GX attack is broken AF. My opponent was attempting to lock me out and then set up for a quick sweep, probably in the next turn, but they made a mistake in gusting up Talonflame, which has free retreat. And because my board was well established, I had everything I needed to bring Charizard back in, put the final Leon in the discard pile, which it turns out I didn't actually need because Gengar and Mimikyu only has 240 HP, but regardless, still seem really cool. I got Charizard in, I managed to discard the Leon with Battle Sense and blow up Gengar and Mimikyu with the game-winning 300 damage Royal Blaze. And there's your weekly dose of Charizard. I'm not gonna lie, it was super fun to play with this deck. I think that at its core, the theme deck is actually a very strong starting point for a competitive deck. Now, the reliance on rare candy is a bit troublesome at times, but the Charizard and Leon core is so well designed that I'm willing to look past that. Charizard is big, beefy enough for a stage 2 anyway, has a reasonable energy cost for its attack, and an ability which, at the very minimum, instantly creates synergy with, its Royal Blaze attack and the Leon supporter, but also just generally helps you boost your consistency. I think that if more Stage 2 Pokemon were designed with this much care, we'd see a lot more of them in the metagame. Now, it's not going to cause a revolution overnight because, if the popularity of this deck can hold, yeah, I think it might put the game in a more interesting direction, but I don't see crazy big 3-prize Pokemon going away anytime soon, unfortunately. And the reliance on rare candy for these kinds of decks is really going to hamper people's willingness to play with them. But still, it's shocking to me that this deck came out alongside the Dreadnought theme deck, which made an absolutely abysmal attempt to do a similar thing with this whole evolved Pokemon supporter combo, and it managed to really screw that up on a stage 1. You know, looking at how well they designed Charizard, that Dreadnought should have been a lot better, but that's just my opinion. Now, if I had a critique of this deck, beyond the obvious rare candy complaint, it would be that this deck doesn't leave a lot of room for a backup attacker. You need so many consistency boosters to turbo out a Charizard every turn, kind of like in the way you need to turbo out a baby Blacephalon every turn in that deck, that there isn't really room for something else to dish out respectable damage on your off turns. I did manage to squeeze in Talonflame V, but it never produced value as an attacker. If you elect to run this deck with, let's say, the Jirachi Scoop Up Net package, you're also going to be very hard-pressed to find room for anything to back up the big orange dragon, so keep that in mind. Like I mentioned, there was a very different build I could have taken where I included a couple more Talonflame. You know, it depends. I think just supporting Charizard is probably the way to go, but if you can find room to sneak in something like a Victini V or, you know, some other kind of fire attacker, it's in your best interest. And that about wraps it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick look at the new Charizard theme deck. Please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Personally, I'm really enjoying these theme deck upgrades so far, and I hope you are too. If there's a theme deck you'd like me to look at, please let me know. Seriously, please let me know. We're locked down again in my corner of Canada, so I'm suddenly going to have a lot more time on my hands for making Pokemon goodness. Oh, and speaking of Pokemon goodness on YouTube, please make sure to check out a new sealed-only series at my buddy Peter's channel. He's taking an Inteleon theme deck from fresh out of the box to tournament ready, and the series is off to a really strong start. The link to his channel is in the description, so go and check him out, like now. And that's it, so until next time guys, take it easy.